The story began in a noisy classroom where a smiling boy with bangs was talking at the front. Meanwhile, the protagonist remained in the back, sitting alone and drawing. In his notebook, it could be seen that he was designing a piece of furniture accompanied by technical notes, and even so, he showed a faint smile as he stayed focused. In his mind, specific details of the design also took shape. He imagined a Dutch style made with paulownia wood and meticulous decorative work on the surface. However, that calm was broken when near him, two classmates raised their voices over a throw, since they were boasting and arguing at the same time. Suddenly, something struck the back of his head hard, accompanied by a sharp, dry sound. When he turned around, he saw two boys holding a mop and a stick, still surprised, and then he realized that what had hit him was a cleaning cloth. One of them apologized and took the blame lightly, as if nothing significant had happened. Even so, the confusion grew when that boy called him by the wrong name. Consequently, another classmate corrected the pronunciation to make it clear that he was Kutsuzawa Kusei. After that, the smiling boy repeated his correctly stated surname and commented casually that it was the first time he had heard his voice. Right after, he shifted his attention to the protagonist's notebook, assuming that he might be hiding something. He also mentioned that he watched popular shows too. However, the conversation was interrupted when two girls, while flipping through a magazine, reacted with surprise to a photo and spoke excitedly upon discovering that one of them appeared next to a very famous model. The blonde girl pointed at the image enthusiastically. At the same time, another girl looked impressed, and the one with short hair commented on how incredible it was that an amateur model could appear next to professional models. Then, the blonde girl, slightly blushing, explained that that day they had worked at the same place. While the girls kept talking, the protagonist tried to resume the dialogue with the boy from before and asked him whether he was actually listening. However, since he got no answer, Kusei asked again, still holding the cloth, what he was supposed to do with it. Even so, the smiling boy walked away without paying attention to him and headed toward the girls, raising his voice as if wanting to listen in as well. In this way, the protagonist remained behind, alone again, looking down, dejected, until he decided to get up with the intention of washing his face. Nonetheless, without him realizing it, the blonde girl watched him with a serious expression. Then, in the boys' bathroom, the protagonist saw himself in the mirror, discouraged, with drops of water on his face, thinking that that had been his chance to speak. At the same time, he remembered that a few months had already passed since he had entered high school. In his memory, the groups that talked among themselves had more or less already formed. Therefore, since he had missed his chances to join any of them, he had ended up completely isolated, sitting alone while everyone else already had their group. In front of the mirror, he described himself as what they called a solitary introvert. He even felt that he would like to be able to talk to anyone the way that boy had just done. However, he understood that that kind of behavior must come from the confidence of those who stood at the top of the school's social status. Thus, Kusei imagined that if he tried talking to such a popular group, everything would end badly, and he pictured himself approaching them and interrupting their conversation. That negative imagination continued with exaggerated scenes in which the situation became humiliating and dramatic for him, absurd punishments born from his insecurity that piled up to the extreme. Finally, the fantasy ended, and he returned to the present. Now sitting in the bathroom, he kept thinking that the problem wasn't only with popular groups, but also with his doubt about whether he could make friends at all. Because of that, he tried to remember how he used to do it before. In the silence of the empty bathroom, he reached the conclusion that everything would be different if he had some hobby in common with the others. Although at the same time, he acknowledged that people who could get excited about the same things as others already possessed a kind of talent, at least from his perspective. When he left the bathroom still holding the cloth, a voice called out to him by his surname. He turned around, surprised, and saw a slender girl. She introduced herself as Yoko Kira, and also apologized for speaking to him so suddenly. Then, with a big smile on her face, she told him she wanted to ask him something after classes. Therefore, that declaration left Kusei very confused. Later, in an empty hallway, the clock marked the hour. There, A small wooden cabinet was now finished, and Kusei had just set it in place. Yoko Kira was impressed when she saw it and commented that he had fixed it in an instant. However, Kusei downplayed it and explained that he had only re-nailed the board that was broken. Even so, Yoko Kira insisted that he had done it really fast. After that, outside, in front of a workshop, Kusei explained that his family owned a workshop where they made furniture and that he had learned by helping them. Yoko Kira reacted as if she understood and added that during the break, she had taken a quick look at his notebook. That was why she had assumed he was good at those things. And according to her, she had been right. Then Kusei clarified that he helped with the family business, although he also designed things as a hobby. Yoko Kira praised him, saying he already seemed like an artisan. However, Kusei responded that he still had a long way to go. At that moment, Yoko Kira explained that the cabinet was club property, and that since they had a limited budget, the repair was extremely helpful for them. Kusei was glad that it would serve them well. Suddenly, another girl appeared to call Yoko Kira and ask her to go to the club. Yoko Kira hurried, and with repeated apologies, prepared to leave. However, before going, she sincerely thanked Kusei and invited him to visit the club someday. Kusei said goodbye with a faint smile, and once he was alone again, he found himself wondering what club it might be. As he continued walking, Kusei thought that Yoko Kira was a good person. Likewise, he realized that although at first he had believed she might be someone similar to him, in reality she had great ease for talking, and that difference made him feel a certain distance. Even so, he preferred to see the positive side. Since that day he had spoken with 2 people from his class. In his mind then appeared the image of Tsunemata Castle as a clear comparison. It was known as the castle built in a single night. However, in reality, it had taken several days to construct, and that idea helped him accept that friendship did not develop overnight. With that, Kusei understood that there was no need to rush and that sooner or later he would find someone he could connect with. Kusei kept walking alone along the street when suddenly the blonde girl rode past on her bicycle, laughing and humming a tune carefreely. He looked up at the sky and noticed a cloud that reminded him of the Toyotomi family crest. From that thought came the desire to be as good at winning people over as Hideyoshi had been. Then he heard a noise and realized that a bicycle was losing control. Alarmed, Kusei turned around to see that the bicycle was heading straight toward him at high speed. The impact seemed inevitable. However, in an unexpected twist, Kusei stopped the bicycle with his body, preventing a tragedy. The girl, surprised and sweating, realized that she had braced herself for pain, yet it hadn't hurt as much as she imagined. However, when she looked up, she realized that she had been saved by a boy from her own class, which startled her even more. Kusei, on the other hand, was also sweating, but with an expression of pain. Inside, he acknowledged that the blow had struck him in the abdomen. She worried about his condition, and Kusei managed to say that he was fine, although his body seemed to say otherwise. The girl was grateful and made it clear that Kusei had saved her. Additionally, with a smile, she commented that she hadn't known he was so fast, called him by his surname, and asked him if he really was okay. Kusei, still kneeling, watched her closely and tried to place her. He thought she was part of the Jaru group in his class and searched his memory for her name. However, he ended up saying someone else's name, confusing her, which left her bewildered. Then she clearly introduced herself as Mizuguchi Seika and, at the same time, pulled his arm to help him stand up. She also explained that Daguchi was her friend. Kusei apologized, and his expression showed the panic of having mistaken the name of someone who stood at the top of the class's social status. After that, Seika leaned toward him to ask what his name was. At that point, Kusei's mind drifted into an exaggerated dramatization, as if he were bidding farewell to his parents before departing. Because of this, Seika reacted with confusion at his behavior. Kusei grew nervous. A short laugh slipped out of him, and then the situation shifted when Seika made it clear that she wasn't angry and that, for some reason, she found Kusei funny. Then Seika insisted that she had already introduced herself and wanted Kusei to tell her his name as well. Kusei understood that leaving without saying anything would be strange. Therefore, he finally introduced himself as Kutsuzawa Kusei. Seika repeated his name, although she paused for a moment on the pronunciation. At that moment, the protagonist began to say nonsense since he didn't know how to start a conversation. Sika fell silent with a shadowy expression, and Kusei noticed her reaction. That pause in turn triggered another negative fantasy in his mind. Even though they were classmates, he thought that perhaps Seika didn't want to associate with an introverted person like him. In the worst-case scenario, he imagined a scene where popular girls confronted him for approaching Seika, accusing him of getting pushy just because he had helped her a little. With that idea, Kusei concluded that the best thing would be to leave quickly and accept that they probably wouldn't interact again. So he tried to say goodbye and walk away. But Seika stopped him on the spot and asked him to wait. She then tried to move forward on her bicycle. However, something sounded off and Kusei realized that the chain had come off. Immediately, he asked her if she wanted him to fix the bicycle, which left Seika astonished since she couldn't believe it. Seika apologized again for the trouble, but Kusei dismissed it, assuring her that he could fix it right away. At the same time, he thought that if Seika apologized like that, perhaps she wasn't as bad a person as he had assumed. While working on the chain, Kusei remembered hearing that she was a magazine model. Therefore, he understood that if it hadn't been for something like this, he would never have had contact with someone like her. When he finished, he confirmed that the chain was back in place. Seika was impressed to see it already done and reacted enthusiastically, calling him a god. Then Seika smiled as she recorded him with her phone. She wanted to upload that feat to Twitter, and Kusei was shocked when he realized she had filmed him without permission. Inside, he felt strongly that he didn't want that posted online and tried to refuse. However, Seika clarified that his face wasn't visible, so it was fine. In the end, Kusei ended up agreeing, completely defeated. While the narration emphasized that he was an introvert incapable of resisting pressure from extroverted people, Seika continued smiling with her phone in hand and tried to reassure him. She said that only her friends would see it because her account was private. And afterward, she even admitted that what she had done had been wrong. Even so, Saika laughed naturally, as if everything could be solved with that lightheartedness. Kusei kept turning over in his mind the phrase she had said, and finally he thought that as long as his face wasn't visible, it would be fine. Then Kusei said goodbye with the intention of leaving. He also mentioned that the chain was old and that she might want to replace it. Saika accepted without arguing. As he let out a sigh, Kusei admitted to himself that he never understood what extroverted people were thinking, and since he was tired, he preferred to go home quickly to rest. Kusei began walking, but Saika followed him while pushing her bicycle. Then, he turned around and realized she was coming behind him. In his mind arose the sudden alarm of feeling followed. Saika asked him if his house was nearby, and inside Kusei's head, panic built up at the idea that she might want to know where he lived and what she might do with that information. Kusei answered that it was a walking distance away, thus indirectly admitting that it was indeed close. Saika smiled broadly and said that was nice. She also commented that she wished she lived closer to the school too. In the reflection of a convex street mirror, Kusei saw himself trapped in that situation and again thought fearfully that she might be following him all the way to his home. Because of this, he tried to create distance by saying he would take a different route. However, Saika replied that she had never been through those streets before. Kusei felt she had followed him for a good while, until Saika revealed that it was a joke and clarified that she was actually going the other way. Then she said goodbye naturally, saying they would see each other tomorrow. Kusei responded nervously and remained still, releasing a heavy sigh. Still tense, he acknowledged that he had gotten scared thinking she would follow him to his house, and concluded that people like her had a completely unpredictable sense of personal boundaries. Just when it seemed everything was over, Saika remembered something. She ran back and called out to Kusei, and he reacted with a jolt. Saika came very close, blushing, raising her hand, and made it clear that she had forgotten to say something. Then she thanked him for fixing her bicycle. Kusei was left bewildered, not understanding what was happening. Exhausted, Saika pointed to her hand and asked him to give her a high five as a gesture of gratitude. Kusei grasped the idea, though it was still hard for him to keep up with her pace. Finally, Kusei and Saika high-fived. Saika celebrated energetically and repeated her thanks, while Kusei wondered what all of that even was. Kusei understood that Saika had run all the way there just to thank him. Internally, he also admitted that perhaps all that time he had held an unfair misunderstanding about her, and that maybe Saika truly was a good person. Saika said goodbye once more with a smile, and Kusei also said goodbye before continuing on toward his house. While Saika watched him from behind, she repeated Kusei's name to herself, and at the same time smiled widely with genuine curiosity. The next day, outside the school, Kusei entered the classroom and noticed that it was noisier than usual, which intrigued him. Beside him, Yokokura greeted him naturally, and Kusei responded nervously. At that moment, he realized he was speaking naturally with someone as soon as he arrived at school, which filled him with excitement. Then he commented that there was quite a commotion compared to other days. Yokokura, who had been sitting and reading, looked up when she heard him. Then the rumor spread that a boy had appeared on Mizuguchi's Twitter, and Kusei reacted in shock. Yokokura checked her phone and showed him the post. Kusei tried to calm himself, thinking that they hadn't said it was him. However, the screen clearly showed a video of Kusei fixing a bicycle, alongside a caption saying that a boy from her class had repaired her bike and that he was a god. As a result, Kusei recognized that the boy was him. To make matters worse, someone suggested he might be her boyfriend, and Kusei's fear skyrocketed. Yokokura noticed how pale he had become and worriedly asked him if he was okay. Kusei tried to say that he was fine, although he felt his breakfast was about to come back up, and Yokokura replied with a direct remark that was not being fine. Nearby, some boys, indignant, criticized the desperate ones and demanded that no one mess with Mizuguchi. While wondering who the guy in the video was, Kusei felt that his ordeal had already begun. He thought that if they discovered it was him, everything would get worse. In his imagination, he even saw himself in an extreme scene, burned alive and crucified, and in his mind remained the certainty that they were going to kill him. At that moment, someone shouted a loud greeting. Just as they were talking about her, Mizuguchi Saika appeared and asked why everyone was gathered. Kusei weakly greeted her and tried not to stand out. Inside, he wished she wouldn't talk to him at all. While the murmurs continued and the same question echoed again, who was the man in the video, Saika stepped forward and, upon seeing Kusei, smiled. Then she greeted him cheerfully, using his surname, and thanked him for yesterday. Faced with that, Kusei was overwhelmed, feeling that this was the end for him. Breaking into a cold sweat, he was left speechless and understood that this was a crisis. At the same time, several boys approached in anger after hearing his surname and began threatening him. Amid that tension, Saika leaned toward Kusei flirtatiously, adopting a playful pose. Then she commented that her bicycle was working incredibly well now, like new, and Kusei could barely respond, still stunned. From behind, he felt tremendous pressure. Then Miyasaka approached to greet Saika. Immediately, he remarked that Saika seemed to be in a good mood so early in the morning. Saika answered him calmly. Meanwhile, Kusei recognized him in horror as the boy who had thrown the cloth at him the day before. Miyasaka insinuated whether the two of them were that close, and several boys cheered the question. However, Saika looked at him seriously and made it clear that it had nothing to do with him. Moreover, some others echoed the same sentiment. Miyasaka tried to excuse himself by saying that he just happened to be looking at the class Twitter and came across Saika's account. Even so, their classmates accused him of it not being an accident. Saika stared at him with disdain and called him an online stalker. Nervously, Miyasaka insisted it had been a coincidence, but the others pressured him, saying it sounded forced. Then Miyasaka showed the image from the video and asked whether the one in it was Kutsuzawa and whether they were dating. Kusei sweated and tried to deny it, explaining that it wasn't like that and that they had just bumped into each other by chance. However, Miyasaka clicked his tongue and exploded, demanding that he speak clearly. Kusei froze. Saika, for her part, asked Miyasaka why he was yelling so much, and he apologized through gritted teeth. Then Saika repeated that whether she had a boyfriend or not had nothing to do with him. She also reproached him for always looking for a fight. Miyasaka couldn't respond. He remained silent, fists clenched, staring at the floor. Suddenly, someone arrived and placed a hand on Miyasaka's shoulder. Immediately afterward, an energetic girl entered the classroom, shoved him aside violently, and called for Saika. Behind her appeared another girl with chestnut hair and a serious expression, who greeted calmly. Consequently, Saika replied in the same unbothered manner. Then, the chestnut-haired girl looked at Kusei and asked him with obvious disinterest what he was doing there. Kusei looked away, caught a glimpse of Miyasaka on the floor, and without really understanding what was happening, wondered who that girl was. However, the friend pointed at Kusei and recognized him as the boy from yesterday's Twitter, and Saika confirmed it. While their classmates listened attentively, the friend remarked that she had thought Saika had posted photos with a boy on her work account, and that because of that, she had assumed Saika already had a boyfriend. Then Saika explained that she had posted from the wrong account and added that Kusei had helped her by chance on the way home. From there, the general murmuring spread. However, her friend accepted the explanation, and with that, the gathering finally dissolved. As a result, Kusei thought with relief that he had been forgiven. At that moment, the bell rang. Saika noticed the time and said that homeroom was starting, so she left. Kusei replied nervously. However, before walking away, Saika called him by his surname again. Then she approached him and whispered with a coquettish look that she would thank him properly later. Kusei was left in shock. At the same time, behind him, Miyasaka overheard with an enraged, dark, and intimidating expression. Later, a clock showed that it was just before lunchtime. Kusei continued taking notes as the teacher finished the class and announced that there would be a short quiz next time. Just then, Saika appeared in a good mood and called Kusei as if he were her senpai, which surprised him. Next, Saika leaned over his desk with a smile and wanted to know what he always did at lunchtime. With enthusiasm, she suggested getting bread or going to the cafeteria and added that she would treat him as thanks for yesterday. Inside, Kusei perceived her as a character difficult to keep up with. Even so, Kusei apologized and said he had brought a bento. Saika commented that his mom must be very diligent. However, Kusei clarified that he had made it himself. At that moment, Saika's friend entered abruptly and was shocked to learn that Kusei cooked, causing him to react with surprise. Then Kusei remembered that Saika had said Deguchi was her friend, and suddenly, everything became clear to him. Seeing Deguchi in person, he understood that this was the real Deguchi. Deguchi, meanwhile, was startled by the idea of a fake, while Saika could only laugh. Even so, Deguchi seemed disappointed and called him disgraceful. At that moment, another friend, Sonoda Ria, appeared and asked what was going on while urging them to hurry up so they could go eat. Then Deguchi joked that it looked like Saika wanted to take advantage of Kusei's bento. Saika exploded in denial. However, Sonoda, with a serious look, accepted it emotionlessly as if it were already obvious. Shortly after, they all put their hands together and said, "Bon appétit." Kusei looked tense, and inside, he had no idea how they had ended up eating together. While Sonoda focused on her own meal, the girls kept talking. Deguchi mentioned that Saika had bread, and Saika insisted that it wasn't because of that. Meanwhile, Kusei felt that people were staring at them too much, as if several gazes targeted him. At that moment, someone told him it was impressive and asked whether he made the bento for himself. Sonoda looked at the bento and commented that grilling fish and making things like that must take effort. Kusei replied that it wasn't that much and that in reality there were quick recipes. Sonoda accepted that and said she might try it someday. Then Kusei asked if Sonoda also cooked. Sonoda answered without emotion that her boyfriend always pushed her about wanting a homemade bento, so she always prepared too. She added that it was strange how, even today, people still said that women had to cook. Consequently, Kusei felt he had stepped on a landmine. However, Sonoda immediately clarified that she wasn't angry and that she was just showing off. Kusei remained silent. Saika, in a low voice, commented that although Sonoda complained, she always looked happy. Sonoda protested because they were talking about her. Saika, in turn, told her to go show off somewhere else. Deguchi laughed and said that Saika would be the one bragging the most once she got a boyfriend. Sonoda, as dry as ever, confirmed it. Then Saika placed her hands on the desk and admitted that she would, because when she had a boyfriend, it would be with her soulmate, and it would be true love. That line, moreover, was accompanied by a dreamy sparkle in her expression. During lunch, Kusei was surprised to realize that with someone like Saika, anyone would assume she had had 1 or 2 boyfriends. However, he immediately corrected that thought and understood that the only thing he had truly learned was not to judge by appearances. In that context, Deguchi took interest in him and wanted to know if he had a girlfriend. At the question, Kusei smiled awkwardly and admitted that he hadn't had one either, explaining that he spent a lot of time alone while Saika listened quietly. As a result, Saika reacted with surprise at that way of living and made it clear that to her it sounded boring. Even so, Kusei answered that it wasn't boring because he kept himself busy with hobbies. Saika interpreted that as his being good with his hands and was impressed, until suddenly she burst out with enthusiasm, praising him as if he were a companion with noble ideals. Immediately, Kusei tried to deny it, and inside, he understood that the real problem was his lack of social skills. Shortly after, the conversation became lighter and more trivial. Saika commented that Kusei could talk quite normally. Then Kusei responded jokingly, wondering aloud whether he should stutter or maybe even dance more, and the idea of dancing became tied to TikTok. Saika laughed, and in that way, the exchange continued without becoming serious. After classes, outside the school, Saika stretched, making it clear that it was time to go home. She then noticed something. Kusei, wasting no time, slipped away quickly. Saika watched him and was surprised at how fast he packed up, as if he truly intended to sprint away at full speed. Meanwhile, as she looked at him, she smiled and thought he was funny. However, that same thought stopped her, and she realized she should wait. Saika put her things in her bag and noticed that she was still looking toward Kuzuzawa Kusei. That persistence, in turn, unsettled her. She also recognized that she had taken notice of him even before the bicycle incident. In that memory, Saika saw him as someone who didn't get swept up in everyone else's vibe, someone who made and fixed things as if he had his own world. Then she recalled that during break he had been drawing blueprints, and she admitted that she had once peeked secretly. The image focused on Kusei's hand, tracing lines so precise they looked machine-made. Saika blushed as she accepted that honestly, she found it incredible. Suddenly, someone opened the door. At that moment, Miyasaka appeared with a smile and called out to her. Saika was surprised, recognized him, and asked what he wanted. Miyasaka positioned himself behind her and suggested going to a takoyaki place near the station. Saika rejected him without hesitation. Even so, Miyasaka insisted, offering to treat her. Saika responded irritably, saying she had a long day ahead and didn't want snacks, and the story emphasized how persistent he was. Far from backing off, Miyasaka kept smiling confidently and continued insisting. At the same time, Saika thought of his name and clearly recognized that she couldn't stand him. In her mind remained the idea that he only tried to get close because she was a model or something similar. In fact, as she walked away, she described that impression as careless, obsessed with appearances, and empty inside. Even as Saika distanced herself, Miyasaka called out to her again. At that moment, Saika looked toward the direction Kusei had gone and realized something about herself, as if she saw her own reflection in that criticism. Miyasaka, confused, questioned her remark, but Saika cut the moment short, saying it was nothing and that she would see him later. Then Saika heard someone calling her from behind. She looked forward with a serious expression and, without stopping for that voice, decided to take her bicycle and leave. While she was walking, Saika focused on a constant thought. She felt jealous of people who have something they love and can face it head-on. At the same time, she felt she didn't have anything like that, and not even her modeling job made her feel complete. Then, when she thought about Kusei, Saika associated that passion with the act of doing things, as if it came naturally to him. That idea, however, stopped her. Saika braked her bicycle and was surprised to realize where she was. She had arrived in front of a workshop, and she understood that by thinking about him, she had somehow ended up finding that place. Right away, she recognized it as the place belonging to Kuzuzawa Kusei. When she looked at the sign with his surname, she assumed that since it was unusual, it had to refer to him. She also noticed, surprised, that it wasn't far from where they had separated the day before. From there, Saika fell into panic. She didn't understand why she had come all the way there and accused herself of acting like a stalker. She remained standing at the entrance, reading the sign that offered custom-made furniture, unable to justify her presence. Even so, she looked inside the workshop. Someone was working with a woodworking machine. Kusei appeared, sweating as he worked, and it was clear how carefully he carved the wood. Saka watched him in surprise and with restrained emotion. Kusei adjusted the cloth on his head and went back to working with focus. Nearby, a board displayed floral designs made in resin, making it clear that this was handcrafted work. Kusei held the wood and the tool firmly. In a wider panel, the two of them remained at opposite ends, Kusei working seriously and Seika watching him in silence. In Seika's mind, a simple conclusion took hold. He was truly incredible. Then Seika took out her phone. Without knowing why, she wanted to capture that scene and take it home with her. From the entrance, she took a photo. The click sounded clearly. Kusei turned around surprised, and his expression showed that he had no idea what was happening. Seika, flushed and nervous, was left speechless. In her mind, the realization of what she had just done hit her hard. Kusei tried to ask her awkwardly, wanting to understand why she was there at that moment. Seika tried to explain, but couldn't find any orderly way to do so. Feeling cornered, she got on her bicycle and hurried away, apologizing for the inconvenience. However, Kusei asked her to wait. In that attempt to flee, the bicycle chain slipped off, stopping her movement. Seika reacted to the sound, and at that moment remembered what Kusei had warned her. The chain looked old, and it would be better to replace it. Kusei arrived out of breath and again asked her to wait. Seika panicked, convinced that everything was over for her, while Kusei, exhausted, insisted that she please stop. Inside the workshop, the two of them finally stood together. Kusei held out a bottle and offered it to her. Seika took it and thanked him. Then, seriously, Kusei wanted to know how it was even possible that she knew where he lived. Seika fell into internal panic because she couldn't say that she had followed him without realizing it, and her mind exploded with the pressure to come up with something. So she gave a long explanation. She said she had recently moved, that she didn't know the area, that she happened to pass by, that she wanted to explore, that she saw the workshop sign with the surname Kutsuzawa, and since it was unusual, thought it might be related to him. Therefore, she went in. Kusei replied that it was a very long explanation. Even so, he understood the essential part, that she had basically found his place. Seika confirmed it strongly, and deep inside, she repeated to herself that technically she wasn't lying. Kusei let that go, and moved on to the question that mattered. He wanted to know why she was taking photos. Seika froze. Deep down, she understood it was logical for him to ask that. She gathered her courage and confessed that she thought he looked incredible. Seika explained that he was so absorbed in what he was doing that he didn't even notice someone was there, and to her, that looked truly amazing. That confession shook Kusei from head to toe. Seika watched him, not understanding his reaction. Kusei, nervous, felt that her explanation sounded somewhat uncomfortable. Then Kusei burst into shock upon realizing that Saka had been taking pictures of him. Seika panicked, as if she didn't understand why he would reach that conclusion. However, Kusei clarified that he had thought she was filming what he was doing, not taking photos of him. Hearing that, Seika became completely embarrassed. She froze and began to shake, which made Kusei worry about her condition. Even so, Seika tried to justify herself and explained that when she saw a really good shot, she captured it without thinking. In her mind, she assumed that this explanation was her escape route. For his part, Kusei looked at the phone and interpreted it as something typical of someone used to social media. Meanwhile, Seika, sitting down and red-faced, felt that everything was unbearably embarrassing. On the phone screen, the picture of Kusei working appeared. Kusei was surprised to see that indeed there was a full shot of him. Carefully, he asked whether she intended to post it. Seika let out a forced laugh and said it was fine, that she wouldn't upload it, though inwardly she became scared upon realizing that keeping it only for herself could also sound bad. Then Kusei lowered his gaze and admitted that honestly he would prefer if she deleted it. Seika couldn't help feeling sad at the idea. Even so, in her mind, she looked at the photo again and described it as beautiful, focusing on the radiance of someone doing what they truly love with complete concentration. Moved by that emotion, Seika asked to keep the photo as long as she didn't use it improperly. Kusei reacted in surprise. Embarrassed, Seika insisted that it had turned out really pretty and that it would be a waste to delete it. Kaosei, remembering what had happened that morning, made it clear that he didn't want it to happen again. Upon hearing that something had happened, Seika was startled. However, Kosei softened his words and explained that rather it had been as if something had almost happened. Hearing that, Seika sank into herself, realizing she didn't even know how many problems she had already caused. Because of this, Seika bowed to apologize. She said she had probably been inconsiderate and reaffirmed that she truly wouldn't put it online. Kusei only sighed. Then, looking at her sincerely, he accepted that if she wouldn't post it on social media, then she could keep it. Immediately, Seika lit up with excitement. After that, Kusei added that if she wanted, she could crop his face and play around with it. However, Seika firmly refused. Finally, Kosei concluded that as long as she didn't use it maliciously, he would accept it. As a result, Seika was delighted. Afterwards, Seika changed the subject and wanted to know what Kusei had been working on. He explained that he was prototyping many things as a hobby, but that they weren't going very well and weren't anything he could show. Even so, Seika insisted that he show her, though Kosei refused with an apology. Seika accepted, but inside she held on to the idea that he didn't show anything unfinished. She interpreted that as a professional mindset, and that impression made her blush intensely. For his part, Kosei worried that he had disappointed her and imagined that she already thought he was boring. Then he touched a box and decided to show her something. 3 carved figures appeared on the table, a rabbit, a small bear, and an elephant, all as wooden sculptures. Seika reacted in surprise as she recognized the carving. Emotion rose in her immediately, and she called it cute, adding that it was unbelievable. She was also impressed to confirm that Kosei had truly made them with his own hands, and not with a machine. Then, sitting at the table, Seika looked at Kusei with a confused expression for a moment, as if she needed to reorganize what she was seeing. At the same time, Kusei also became confused by that brief pause. Immediately afterward, with her eyes shining, Seika declared that it was a definitive national treasure. Kusei responded shyly that she was exaggerating. Even so, he smiled in satisfaction when he realized that her reaction was much better than he had expected, and he felt genuinely happy while Seika kept admiring the figures. Then, Kosei placed something else on the table and called out to Seika. She turned quickly, surprised. Before her eyes appeared a large carved figure of Oda Nobunaga. Kusei pointed out that he also had an Oda Nobunaga, and Seika burst into laughter, equally surprised. The figure looked huge and detailed. Seika found the choice random and didn't understand why him specifically. She also pointed out how enormous it was. Kosei, however, was simply satisfied that she had laughed. Laughing, Seika typed something on her phone and said that the statue was killing her with how funny it was. In his mind, Kusei felt pleased by those laughs. However, a hand was shown typing quickly, and Kosei watched in surprise as he noticed the movement. He immediately realized she was about to send something, and he understood what that meant. Seeing his reaction, Seika said that habit had gotten the best of her. Then, a screen appeared showing that it had already been posted. Kosei began to sweat, horrified, and inwardly begged her to reflect a little on herself. Even so, Seika held the phone and tried to calm him down. She said that this time she hadn't posted it on her work account like the day before. She also smiled nervously so that he could see. On the screen, the post appeared, a photo of the Nobunaga statue. Seika laughed and pointed out that his face wasn't visible at all, that it was just Nobunaga. The caption on the phone said that the wooden Nobunaga statue was killing her with laughter. Even so, Kusei remained terrified and sweating with embarrassment. Then, Seika became serious and added that there was nothing in the picture that showed where he lived. Kusei, still embarrassed, accepted that, but asked that next time she please check with him first. Finally, Seika bowed apologetically, said she was sorry, and promised it wouldn't happen again. Inside the workshop, Seika leaned in far too close to Kausei while examining a box, causing him to blush, and inwardly, he could only note that she was far too close and that her sense of personal space was hard to understand. Seika, on the other hand, spoke naturally and asked him whether he sold those pieces and if she could buy one, unaware of how intimidating it was to be standing so close. In response, Kusei said, embarrassed, that he couldn't sell any of those figures because they were already reserved. Seika repeated the idea while looking toward the table, trying to understand. Then, the memory appeared of a little girl hugging one of the figures with joy, and from that, Kusei explained that he gave them to the children of a foster home, something he did every year for a neighborhood event. Seika accepted the reason and recognized that there was nothing she could say against that. Even so, she sighed as she looked at one of the figures sadly and admitted that it was a shame because she really wanted it. Kusei apologized. However, he added that he had a spare of the Nobunaga one and dropped the heavy figure onto the table. Then he took a breath and, as an alternative, offered to make something else for her. Seika was genuinely surprised, as if she had not expected that offer. Meanwhile, Kusei said it cheerfully, explaining that after all, it was his hobby. He also mentioned that this was wood carving, though he could also make other things like plush toys or little figurines. Seika repeated the word figurines quietly, as if tasting it, and then asked whether he had been making things like that for a long time. Kusei answered modestly, saying yes, though his older works were low in quality. Then, with genuine interest, he realized that she might want to make them too, and began explaining that for beginners, you could start with something simple, an aluminum wire and a bit of oven-baked clay. However, Seika grew nervous and hurried to say that it was fine, that it was enough for her just to look at them, making it clear that she understood he had been about to offer to teach her. Kusei's spirits dropped a little at that response, and he accepted it with a simple acknowledgement. To soften the moment, Seika smiled nervously and commented that, personally, she preferred those wooden carvings because they had a real warmth to them. Right after that, she returned to the practical matter and wanted to know how much it would cost. Kausei was startled by the idea of money since he understood he couldn't accept payment from a classmate. Even so, he also realized she wasn't asking for it for free and that in reality, she was respecting the craft. That idea surprised him because he realized Seika truly appreciated his work. In fact, Seika looked at the figures and explained that all the skill developed over time was poured into those pieces, and that she couldn't accept something so incredible without paying for it. Kusei touched his head while he thought about it, and in the end, searched for a solution that wouldn't reject her intention. That's why he proposed that next time something came up, she could help him with something. Seika lit up instantly, accepted with enthusiasm, and said he could count on her with a radiant smile. In that moment, Seika paused, as if remembering something important, and asked for a moment. Then she admitted that she still hadn't properly thanked him for fixing her bicycle. Kusei was surprised because he thought that eating together had already been her way of thanking him. Seika reacted to that idea, and for a second, her imagination went into exaggerated mode, as if she pictured herself letting him eat with her in a haughty, self-important way. However, she returned to reality, grew serious, and understood that if she acted like that, she would look like a complete fool. And similarly, Kusei also realized that internally, Seika remained thinking about what she should do. Finally, she reached the conclusion that Kusei would probably refuse money, and that what mattered was showing how grateful she was. Because of that, she looked genuinely troubled about how to repay him. Outside the workshop, Seika declared that she had already made a decision. Later, in her apartment, she lay face down on her bed, embarrassed, kicking her legs until they hit the mattress and letting out a scream. Then she tried to justify herself, still embarrassed, and admitted that she had invited him in the heat of the moment. In that memory appeared what she herself had said earlier. She suggested going to the nearby shopping mall, mentioned that there would be places to eat, and finished by saying that she would treat him. That proposal made her startle. Seika blushed when she realized it was the first time she would go out alone with a boy, and since that idea overwhelmed her, she ended up screaming in desperation. Then someone asked her to stop yelling so loudly. At that moment, Seika's phone vibrated. It was a message from her friend Deguchi, who was talking about the post on Twitter. There, Saika told her that the next day they were going out to eat. Deguchi then asked if it was with Kutsuzawa Kusei, and Saika answered yes as a thank you for him fixing her bicycle. Hearing that, Deguchi reacted immediately, joyfully calling it a date, even adding a sticker. In response, Saika rolled around on the bed, screaming for her to shut up. However, Deguchi insisted, repeating the same idea again and again, while Saika replied each time more desperately, demanding that she stop. Then Deguchi asked what all of that really meant. Saika stared at her phone in silence, not knowing what to answer. In the end, she wrote that it wasn't anything important, that it was just a thank you and nothing more. Even so, she seemed restless and confused. Deguchi accepted it, though with doubts, and recommended that she get some sleep for the next day. Even so, Saika remained lying face down, unable to sleep. In her mind, the question appeared of what Kutsuzawa might think, and she answered herself that he probably wasn't thinking much about it at all. Afterward, she was shown lying down while looking at her phone with a soft and dreamy expression, as if repeating that same idea in her mind to convince herself. The next day, Kusei stood in front of a modern building, holding his phone. When he checked the time, he saw it was already 10:52, and understood this was the right place. He had arrived a bit early since the meeting was at 11 o'clock. Then he began walking back and forth, nervous and restless, his steps forming a repetitive rhythm. Inside, he understood that going as a thank you for the bicycle was one thing. However, he was still worried that he would have nothing to talk about and wouldn't know how to keep a conversation going. It also weighed on him that he didn't have her contact information, and at the same time, he felt uneasy, wondering if she would actually show up. At that moment, from a distance, a voice called out to him by his surname. Hearing it, Kusei turned around in surprise. Saika approached wearing a casual, modern outfit, and she greeted him cheerfully with her hand raised. Still surprised, Kusei replied nervously and apologized for making her wait. Even so, inside he was shocked to see her like that, wearing normal clothes and outside the classroom context. Saika gave him a bright smile and clarified that she had just arrived too. Then she stepped closer and, without saying anything for a moment, adopted a thoughtful pose. Kusei noticed the shift and wanted to know what was happening. However, Saika resumed the conversation and said she had already thought about this yesterday. Then, laughing as she touched her chin, she commented on how strange it was to see a classmate wearing regular clothes and how unusual that feeling was. Kusei responded timidly, accepting her comment. As they walked, Kusei made a remark about Saika's casual clothes, saying that she looked very feminine. Even though Saika was guiding the way, she paused at the meaning of those words and wanted to understand what they were supposed to imply. Confusion rose within her, and she ended up questioning what kind of compliment that was supposed to be. Nervous, Kusei tried to explain himself. He said he just meant that gals were very feminine. Saika looked at him with a kind smile. However, she then laughed and pointed out that there were things he was supposed to say, like, "You look cute," or "That looks really good on you." So Kusei took a deep breath and spoke sincerely. He told her that Saika was very pretty and that because of that, he believed anything she wore would look good on her. He said it calmly, without realizing the strength of the compliment. Saika, on the other hand, fell completely into shock. She blushed up to her ears, and even her glasses lifted a little. Then she lowered her head, so embarrassed she could barely speak. Yet she still managed to thank him in a small voice. Kusei was left confused by her reaction. To change the subject, Saika mentioned that they had never exchanged numbers. Kusei replied that he had been thinking the same. Then Saika, smiling, commented that if he hadn't shown up, she would have gone to his house. Kusei was surprised, since he had been the one worrying she might not come. After that, they both extended their phones, making it clear they were exchanging contact information. Saika looked at her screen with a sweet smile and said it was done, and that now Kusei would be fine even if he got lost. However, Kusei answered firmly that he wouldn't get lost. Saika let out a small laugh, and the moment ended with that lightness. Finally, with a confident smile, she suggested going to a game center before eating. Kusei, uncomfortable, clarified that he actually didn't like casino games or anything like that. At that, Seika reacted dramatically, offended that he had understood it that way, and made it clear she had never set foot in a place like that. Then she laughed and, without overthinking it, made it clear she just wanted Kusei to stay with her for a while. In the end, Kusei agreed, intimidated but resigned. From there, the scenes continued without needing many words. The game center machines appeared, a sign indicating a student-only area, and immediately, Seika took Kusei by the arm to lead him. After that, the two of them posed for photos in a Purikura booth. While Seika looked excited, Kusei remained surprised by the situation. Then she checked the printed photos and reacted with satisfaction, and Kusei couldn't help noticing how happy she looked. Later, they were at a restaurant. Kusei thanked her for the meal, and at the same time apologized for letting Seika pay. However, Seika calmly replied that he shouldn't worry because she had been the one to say it was a thank you. She even pointed out that he could have chosen a more expensive place. Also, as she looked at the photos, Seika added that on top of that, she'd managed to see something interesting. Hearing that, Kusei, surprised, commented that the editing in those photo booths was insane. When they finished eating, Seika wanted to keep checking out other places. Kusei assumed she might be planning to buy something. However, Seika told him no, that she simply had nothing else to do that day. So even though it still felt strange to him, Kusei accepted it. Then they arrived at a clothing store. Kusei walked in nervously, questioning whether it was okay for a guy to wander around the women's clothing section. At that moment, from afar, Seika called out to him by his surname, and Kusei turned around in surprise. Seika was holding up a garment excitedly and wanted to know if it looked super cute. Kusei answered uncertainly, as if he didn't know what to say. Inside, he also noted that the outfit seemed too cold around the stomach area, so it didn't seem all that appropriate to him. Even so, Kusei watched her pick out clothing combinations and ended up admitting that he didn't know anything about fashion. He paid attention to how she paired it with a jacket and wondered if Seika could instantly imagine what items would look good together. Meanwhile, Seika checked the prices and complained that they were absurdly expensive. Kusei interpreted that as a kind of common-sense reflex typical of someone professional, and his thoughts went back to her being a model. In response, Seika laughed at his comment and joked by asking if he was interested in being a model too and if he wanted to apply. Kusei, nervous, replied that it wasn't a very funny joke. Then, with a smile, he said he had thought she must really like clothes. Seika understood and replied with gentle sincerity. She said she did like them, but she wasn't sure if it was her number one passion. Then Seika struck a confident pose and, with a bright expression, stated very naturally that she was pretty sure she got modeling jobs because she was beautiful. Kusei was surprised she said it so fearlessly. However, Seika laughed and admitted that maybe it wasn't the best way to phrase it, though she added that the truth was she received a lot of compliments. Then she kept walking while he followed her. Kusei, thoughtful, accepted that he could believe that, since she really was very beautiful. He also noticed that several men in the store were staring at her openly and inwardly understood that people had been watching Seika the entire time. To reinforce that idea, a memory appeared of boys in their class shouting excitedly whenever she showed up as proof of her popularity. After that, a can fell from a vending machine with a sharp clunk, and Kusei understood that it was typical of Seika not to be falsely modest. Right away, Kusei returned with drinks and placed them on a table. Calmly, he went back to what she had said and turned it into a clear question. He understood that even though she enjoyed the compliments, she still didn't consider modeling her number one passion. Seika sat down and thanked him. As she opened the can, she tried to explain that she wasn't sure how to put it into words. Then, to shift the focus, Seika steered the conversation toward Kusei and wanted to know if he had been good at making things from the very beginning. Kusei was surprised and denied it. In fact, he confessed that at the start he had been terrible and had even cut his hands. Seika laughed and replied that for her it had been pretty easy from the beginning. That confused Kusei. Even so, Seika continued, scratching her head, and explained that makeup and fashion had come naturally to her from the start, simply by copying what she saw. She added that later she had studied theory and similar things, so Kusei eventually understood that she was the type with natural talent. Then, a stylized memory appeared of Seika happily wearing a mascot-style costume, as if she had a very clear idea that she had never failed in a way that forced her to get back up and try again. In that same memory, the phrase "easy victory" accompanied the scene, reinforcing that feeling. Hearing her, Kusei wanted to understand whether Seika was saying that her starting point had been different from everyone else's. The memory continued with both of them wearing mascot suits, and Seika contrasted that ease with the fact that Kusei could be knocked down and still try again. As a result, she concluded that if having the passion to keep going because you want to improve no matter what was what defined it, then that was not her. The image showed her asleep inside the costume while Kusei kept running, trying to reach his goals. Faced with that confession, Kusei wanted to know what would have happened if she had failed. Seika, embarrassed, admitted that she probably wouldn't have kept trying. In fact, she confessed that she would have pretended it didn't matter and even used that as an excuse to give up. In the end, she finished by saying that she was that foolish. However, Kusei, holding his drink, murmured that he didn't think there was anything wrong with that. That sentence surprised Seika. Then Kusei opened his drink with a clear sound and added that there were many things he avoided as well. He also acknowledged that, in reality, he had simply been lucky. He had found something he was passionate about from the beginning, and that was all. With a gentle smile, Kusei handed a can to Seika and told her that she could still find that thing for herself, and that there was no need to rush. Seika looked at him, surprised and visibly moved. Then she smiled, blushing, took the drink, and thanked him, clearly showing that his words had touched her more than she expected. As the evening settled in, Kusei said goodbye and thanked her for the day. However, Seika shook her head and thanked him, not only for the time, but also for the conversation about life and for everything she was taking away from it. Kusei smiled and downplayed it, saying he had had a lot of fun. Seika laughed in relief and accepted that if that was the case, then it was good. When they had already taken some distance, Kusei remembered the other promise, the one about carving something, and wanted to know what he should make for Seika. At that moment, Seika lifted a finger, as if she had been waiting for exactly that, and said she had a request. Then she prepared to explain it, a bit embarrassed, and mentioned that she would like a figure from a fairly old anime. For her, that was what she wanted, and she said it with a nostalgic sparkle. Kusei reacted in surprise and said he knew it, remembering that anime. Then he continued, recalling that a long time ago he had made one. However, he clarified that it had been a figure and not a wood carving. Seika couldn't help blushing hearing that, as if she immediately understood the difference. Embarrassed, she wanted to know what had happened to the one he had made. In Kusei's memory, the answer was vague but clear. He believed he had given it to a child who was in the hospital. Upon hearing that, Seika reacted with surprise and emotion, as if that response carried special meaning. Blushing and excited, she began calling him by a nickname, Ko-chan. However, the phrase was cut short when Kusei began speaking, saying that it didn't matter and that he didn't really remember. Then Kusei explained calmly that back then he really liked making figures. He had made a bunch of them, and in the end had ended up giving them away to many different children. In response to that, Seika was left with a tense expression, halfway between suspicious, upset, and hurt. She said nothing. Even so, her gaze showed that she had just understood something, and that she didn't like it. Seika turned slightly away as if processing what had just hit her. While Kusei's voice continued explaining that the first child he gave one to was a girl named Meguru. He also said that the girl had been incredibly happy and that her reaction had left such a strong impression on him that because of that, he didn't remember the other children as clearly. Hearing those words, Seika's body tensed even more. Kusei smiled awkwardly and innocently said that it had been almost 10 years ago, so it was normal not to remember them all. Then, touching the back of his neck, he went back to the idea of making that kururu, offering to make it in good faith. At that moment, Seika's arm trembled with frustration. She muttered that she didn't want it. Kusei froze, not understanding, and could only react with surprise. However, Seika finally snapped. With her face red and her eyes overflowing with pent-up emotion, she shouted that she had already said she didn't want it. Then she called him Ko-chan again and insulted him harshly, as if releasing something she had been holding inside. Immediately after, Seika ran off with a dark expression, hiding her face. She looked embarrassed, frustrated, and wounded. Meanwhile, Kusei remained standing in the middle of the plaza, completely confused, while people walked by as if nothing had happened. Kusei touched his head, overwhelmed, unable to understand what had just happened. Still in shock, he could only repeat his disbelief. Suddenly, understanding struck him, and he fell into total panic. He began denying it again and again, and the question turned into desperation, unable to find a clear reason for what had occurred.
After what happened, we moved to Sika's apartment, where she is lying in bed with her arm covering her eyes, clearly showing a sense of discomfort. It's then that she asks herself what she's doing right now, or rather, what she did just moments ago after running away from the date. She feels really bad for having reacted that way and is aware that the protagonist probably didn't understand anything about what happened. When she remembers what she told him about the little figurines she made 10 years ago, she realizes she can't blame him, since it's been so many years, and therefore, she's the weird one for having held on to that memory all this time. This makes her complain, thinking she's foolish for getting her hopes up that someone she barely knows could hold her in his heart the same way she holds him in hers. To try to relax, she turns to look at her phone and sends Kusei a message apologizing for what she just did to him, but she doesn't say anything else. She keeps staring at the screen for a while until he replies. He also apologizes, asking if he might have done something that offended her. Seika starts typing, wanting to ask him if he remembers anything from when they were kids, but she immediately regrets it, since she doesn't have the courage to take that step yet. So she deletes the message, not knowing that by doing this, Kusei will probably end up worrying and overthinking things more than he should. After this, she throws her phone aside and sighs, knowing that she can't face him right now, since she has too many things on her mind to be brave at this moment. We then move on to see a fight between some magical girls and a Lord of Darkness, who mocks them, confident that he will defeat them. One of the girls starts to fear that they will lose, since if they can't defeat him, everyone's willpower will become like that of an old man. At that moment, someone shouts from a nearby cliff, saying that they can't give up. The one responsible is a girl dressed in black named Kururu, who looks quite exhausted. One of her friends asks her to stop, since she knows that in her current state, she can't do anything. However, the girl in black stands in front of the monster, proudly claiming that she's fine. She then begins to charge her attack with her wand and explains that if she eats 3 times a day and sleeps 8 hours, she'll be completely healed once they're done with this. Even so, her friends try to stop her before she does anything, but it's too late. Kururu then fires her magic cannon at the monster, managing to destroy it in a single blow, saving the day for everyone. At that moment, we see that it was all a program that a little girl had been watching the whole time, and as she finishes, someone calls her, letting her know they're done for today. She was in a hospital, and a nurse congratulated her for behaving very bravely during her first vaccination. According to the girl, it was nothing, and she smiles, explaining that it was because her heroine, Kururu, was giving her best, so she had to do the same. And we see that this is Seika when she was younger, and despite her cheerful attitude, life hadn't exactly been kind to her. Moments later, we see the hospital and how she and her mother were leaving after saying goodbye at the reception. On the way back, inside the van, Seika started asking her mother questions, like why she had to go to the hospital so many times, feeling frustrated about not being able to have a normal life like other children. Her mother explained that it was because if she didn't go, she would start coughing again like before and her condition would worsen, making it clear that Seika had been in very poor health up until that point. In response, Seika tried to say that she wanted to go to school much more, but as they talked, her mother apologized to her through tears, which made Seika nervous. Her mother regretted not having given her a stronger body, which left Seika paralyzed by the scene, and then she simply tried to pretend nothing had happened, looking out at the street as the two continued on their way. Sometime later, when she was on one of her many visits to the hospital, her classmates came to visit her because, due to her checkups, she wasn't able to see them as often at school. They surprised her with a gift from everyone, giving her a lovely surprise to cheer her up as much as possible while wishing her a speedy recovery on behalf of the whole class. Such a gesture made Seika's eyes light up with excitement, and as she took the gift bag, she wondered what it could be, while everyone watched her, waiting for her reaction. The teacher in charge explained to her that since everyone had just changed classes, they wanted to become her friends. The children agreed with the teacher, and that's why they decided to prepare this gift for her together. Such a gesture moved little Seika, who could do nothing but look at the joyful smiles of her new friends. That's why, unable to hold back any longer, she smiled at them and thanked them with all her heart, promising that she would treasure it for her whole life, since this was the first thing she had from her friends, even when they weren't together at school. The girls also told her that, besides them, there was another boy who wanted to give her a gift as well. But unlike them, he wasn't very sociable, so they couldn't tell her more. Hearing that it was a random boy surprised Seika. It was right then that the teacher called him in, since he had been waiting outside the room, too shy to show himself in front of the whole group. This was Ko, and when he entered, Seika turned to look at him closely, since he didn't seem like the type of person who stood out much. Nervously, he tried to say something to her, but it was quite difficult for him. It was then that he managed to gather enough courage to tell her that he would make her something as a gift, but for that, he needed her to tell him what her favorite thing was. This helps us understand the connection between Seika and the protagonist that they had as children. Back in the present, we see that Kusei wakes up to the sound of his alarm, and as he starts to come to his senses, it's raining outside his house. Even so, when he sits on his bed, he realizes that it's already morning. Moments later, he heads off to school carrying his umbrella. On the way, he can't stop thinking that it's already been 5 days since the incident at the mall, when Seika yelled at him angrily after talking about the crafts he used to make as a child. As if that weren't enough, he hasn't spoken to her since that moment, not even at school, and he still doesn't understand why she got so angry with him, which has left him feeling very anxious about what to do regarding the person he thought was his friend. To make matters worse, he remembers the last message he sent her, asking if he had done something to offend her, but after he sent it, she just left him on read and never replied, which only made him even more nervous about the whole situation. As he walks in the rain, the protagonist might say that things have gone back to how they were before they met, and that this is probably how things should have been all along. As he walks, he laments that even if that were the case, he thought that little by little they were opening up to each other and, as such, he hoped they would become friends who could share nice moments together. Moments later, he finally arrives at school, and after leaving his umbrella at the entrance, enters his classroom, where, to his surprise, he comes face to face with Seika, who also wasn't expecting to see him. The protagonist, nervous, tried to come up with an excuse to avoid the awkward encounter, but Seika simply walked past him as if nothing had happened. All the while, not far from the scene, a black-haired girl was watching them, not knowing what to say or think. During the first period of class, Kusei can't stop thinking and believing that he must have done something wrong, since his friend has been ignoring him the whole time without giving him a chance to talk and resolve the problem. He doesn't know what he did either, but he believes it was his fault. Moving on to the fourth period, the protagonist remembers that just before she yelled, he mentioned Meguru in the conversation, suspecting that this is what made her angry and that maybe the two of them know each other. By the seventh period, Kusei feels even worse than when the day began, since Seika only started at the school this year, making it impossible for her to know Meguru. This leads him back to his theory that he is the one responsible for her anger. After this, the protagonist starts to worry, since he spent the entire day overthinking the matter. While the teachers announce that they can now take a break, he thinks that he simply needs to go and ask Seika in person if he really wants to resolve everything. However, he starts overthinking again, worried that the fact she is ignoring him might be her way of showing her contempt and that she doesn't want to talk to him anymore. That's why he tries to remember the look on her face that morning, and when he does, he realizes that she wasn't even looking at him. In fact, she seemed down about something. Kusei understands that no matter how scared he is, he simply can't leave things as they are, and he wouldn't want it to end that way. That's why he now gathers his courage and gets up to go straight to the point, without any more beating around the bush. So he steps out into the hallway, telling himself that he'll try to talk to her one more time, and if she ignores him or something, then he'll consider everything over. After all, He's willing to let her hate him or whatever, but not to let their friendship end like this without even trying to fix things. At that moment, he manages to see her at the end of the hallway, and after gathering enough courage, he tries to call out to her, but just then someone grabs him by the sleeve to stop him. When he turns around to see who it is, he discovers that it's Toguchi, the same girl who was watching them that morning when they met at the entrance. A few moments later, the two friends move to a place away from the eyes of the other students. Toguchi goes to a vending machine, gets herself something to drink, and then calls out to the protagonist, tossing him a can without a second thought. Kusei barely has time to react and, as a result, doesn't know how to catch the can, but manages to do so at the last second. He then asks how much it cost so he can give her the money, but she tells him not to worry about it, since she was the one who brought him there. The protagonist thanks her for inviting him. And just then, Toguchi starts to get to the heart of the matter, realizing that it's about Seika. This makes Kusei nervous, because no matter how close they were, he didn't expect her to instantly understand what was going on between the two of them. He admits that it's true, and then looks at her, waiting for any bad thing she might say about what he did. The protagonist knows her as one of the girls who usually hangs out with Seika, so that's probably how she found out about everything. The fact that she called him to a private place like this to talk makes him wonder if she's angry with him, and if she's going to get back at him for hurting her friend. Toguchi settles herself on a step to sit and talk, knowing that even though he has many things to say and ask, from her perspective, she can't help but take her friend's side. So there are things about him that inevitably make her angry, which immediately causes the protagonist to start worrying about his life. In response to this, Kusei just looks at her and then leans back against a wall, sipping from his can, taking in what she just told him and saying that he understands, showing a much more relaxed attitude than usual. Although he appears calm on the outside, inside he is extremely nervous and starts to wonder if he just stepped on a landmine, since his reaction to such a complaint was far too bland and does nothing to lighten the mood. In fact, if he's unlucky, he might have even made things worse. The protagonist still can't understand the reason for all of this and questions whether something he said was really that bad. Toguchi calls his attention once again and explains that she also understands things from his perspective and therefore realizes that all of this might seem strange and meaningless to him. So even though it bothers her that her friend is hurt, she can't completely blame him either, since after all it was an accident and she knows he's not a bad person. This surprises Kusei, who sighs in relief upon seeing that she isn't here to scold him. He then proceeds to ask her if she knows the whole story between the two of them. Toguchi knows more or less the gist of it, so Kusei doesn't hesitate, and tries to ask her why Seika got angry with him, desperately trying to find an answer to his questions, and reconcile with her. Toguchi, annoyed, orders him to simply go and ask Seika in person. While she is worried that her friend is going through life feeling sad, it's not her job to go around fixing her problems, especially when she has her own feelings to worry about. She also points out that nobody would like others to say things about them based solely on what they've heard. Faced with this logic, the protagonist has no choice but to agree with her, since he wouldn't like others to talk about things they don't even fully understand either, and therefore realizes that the only way to fix it is by talking to Seika. Even so, while Toguchi acknowledges that she shouldn't meddle where she's not wanted, for her, the most natural thing is that when she sees a friend in trouble, the least she can do is lend a hand. She seems a bit nervous just saying it, because no matter how much she cares about her, she still feels embarrassed. Kusei starts to notice that she wants to give him a push to go talk to Seika and points out that the two of them are very close friends. Toguchi doesn't deny it, since they've known each other since elementary school and their first meeting was when she was still very sick. The protagonist is confused when he hears this, asking if Seika used to be sick for a long time, which shows that he doesn't remember anything at all from back then. In response, Toguchi makes a face of total disappointment and annoyance, surprised that the protagonist can be so clueless to the point that it's irritating. He starts to worry because he doesn't know what happened, but the girl finally begins to understand why her friend got so angry with him, which confuses Kusei even more, as he still doesn't understand anything. She lets him know that it doesn't matter what the reason is now, the truth is that no matter how much she wants to, she can't fix it on her own. Therefore, she gives the protagonist a hard slap on the back to knock some sense into him, since she's counting on him to save her friend, and in the process, she almost knocks the wind out of him. Kusei, after recovering from the blow, explains to her that no matter how much she confides in him, there's not much he can do, since Seika has been avoiding him all this time. What he didn't understand is that this was exactly why Doguchi called him to meet here. It wasn't just to give him a little push, but to really help him so he can finally go and fix things. After she buys something else from the vending machine, she holds out her hand, asking him to lend her his phone for a second. Taking advantage of the gesture, she marks Seika's house location on the map, although the distance is such that it might take the protagonist quite a while to walk there. Moments later, Kusei arrives at the apartment complex where Seika lives, following Doguchi's advice. If he corners her, she will have no choice but to talk about what's going on. Once he's there, Kusei mentions that although he came intentionally, he was more surprised than he expected. Additionally, he made sure to come without notifying her or giving any hint of his presence, since, according to Doguchi, if her friend found out, she would do anything to run away and avoid the confrontation. In this way, the protagonist enters the complex, but is shocked to see that after the first door, there is another one, making him feel as if he's in some kind of castle. That's when he comes across the different doorbells in the building, realizing that if he wants to see Seika, he would have to call her. But even though he knows her apartment number, he doesn't really expect anything. When Seika answers, he doesn't realize it's her because her voice sounds different, and he asks to be let in, since he has something really important to talk to her about. After a moment of silence, Seika realizes it's Kusei, whom she almost calls Ku. She asks him how he found her house, to which he, surprised that it was her speaking, explains that it was Doguchi who gave him her location. Seika was expecting something like this, and Kusei explains that he's sorry, but apparently she couldn't just stand by and watch this happen either. Seeing that she can't run away anymore, Seika lets him in and the doors open. A moment later, the protagonist arrives at the door of her apartment. Once face to face, he takes a deep breath to gather his courage, but when he goes to ring the doorbell, his hand is still trembling. This is because he still hasn't forgotten how she got angry with him a few days ago. That's when he starts to chicken out, since he still doesn't know what made her angry and therefore, he's afraid that if he speaks without knowing what he said, he might make things worse. However, he quickly realizes that he can't be a coward now and waste Doguchi's efforts. So, despite his fear, he rings the doorbell. Unfortunately for him, time passes and no one comes to open the door, which worries him. He knows his friend can't have gone out, but he also doesn't sense anyone moving inside the house. Faced with this, he tries calling her phone and hears it ringing right on the other side of the door. When he checks his phone again, he notices that the call was cut off, which helps him understand what's going on. He calls his friend knowing she's right on the other side of the door, but she doesn't answer. Kusei understands that it's hard for her to face him right now. But he also explains that it's just as hard for him. He opens up and says he doesn't understand why things ended up like this just when they were starting to go out together. He's also been tormenting himself with doubts about whether he did something to hurt her or if she's still angry with him. This has been eating away at him ever since, while Seika just remains silent. He goes on and mentions that even though they haven't known each other for long and he's not really in a position to say this, he doesn't feel like she's the kind of person who gets angry over nothing. He also admits that at first he was a little afraid of her, but as time went by he started to feel more and more comfortable with her, to the point where it felt like the most natural thing in the world. The time they spent together was a lot of fun for him, and as such, he never wanted it to end. That's why, filled with sadness, he tries to make her understand that ending their relationship without knowing the reason just hurts him a lot. But Seika still doesn't respond. He asks her again if he did something wrong, and if so, to tell him. And if it's just that she finds him annoying, then he won't talk to her or message her anymore. But in response to both things, Seika remains silent, not knowing what to do. In the end, after quite a while without any answers, Kusei realizes there's nothing he can do and decides to leave. Before he does, Seika opens the door and asks him to wait, holding him by the arm, and then steps outside with a very regretful and sad expression. Seeing this catches the protagonist off guard, to which she mentions that Seika also knew she would have to talk to him sooner or later. Kusei feels uncomfortable about all of this, but then she asks him to come into her house. The protagonist doesn't know how to react, but Seika pulls him by the arm until he finally comes in, and then she locks the door. Once inside, the two of them just sit in different places, quite far apart from each other, not knowing how to start the conversation. The protagonist is the first to start getting restless, keeping his eyes fixed on Seika. Unfortunately, she isn't able to look him in the eyes, as she avoids his gaze completely. He tries to ask why she's avoiding him so much, to which she explains that it's because she's not wearing any makeup right now. But Kusei gets worried, since her tone of voice suddenly became weaker. In response, the protagonist tries to point out that he already saw her at the entrance anyway. She hadn't realized this and starts to get even more nervous. He doesn't care whether she's wearing makeup or not, since he already saw her anyway. Besides, he says there's nothing for her to worry about. Seika demands to know what he means, to which Kusei blushes with embarrassment and straightforwardly says that even without makeup, she's very pretty. Now, Seika won't look at him because she doesn't want him to notice how red she's gotten. Faced with this, she finally gives in and turns to look at him. Kusei feels relieved, since this way he solved the problem of talking face to face. With that said, they decide to get straight to the main issue that brought them here, but he realizes it's not such a simple matter. He admits that he still doesn't understand why she got so upset during their date, and that he only came to her house to clear things up and be able to go back to being friends. After hearing this and thinking for a moment, Seika stands up and asks him to wait, because there's something she wants to show him. So she leaves the room to go get a glass box where she keeps her most treasured possession, a Kururu figurine, which brings back old memories for her. There we once again see her past when she was a child and, more importantly, when the protagonist, whom everyone knew as Ku, offered to make her a gift with his own hands if she told him what she liked most. When she heard this, she was confused until her friends started to explain that he was very skilled with his hands, able to make anything they asked for. To prove it, one of the girls brought her phone and showed Seika that the protagonist had managed to make her a figurine of her favorite anime girl, which left her very surprised. She asked him if he had really managed to make the wooden figure, to which the protagonist nodded. Unfortunately, just at that moment little Seika started coughing, which meant they had to end the meeting for the time being. While the teacher tucked her in to put her to sleep, Seika assured them that it was nothing. It was at that moment that an idea came to her mind, and she asked Ku to make her a figure of Kururu, her favorite heroine, which she requested weekly while covering herself with the blankets. At first, Ku didn't understand, so he grabbed some of the manga nearby to look for references. After looking through them for a bit, he assured her that he could make a little figure, which filled little Seika with excitement. To make her feel secure, he even made a pinky promise, swearing that he would bring her the figure soon. That brings us back to the present, as Seika finishes recalling the past, and there we understand why her connection with the protagonist is so important to her. She heads back to look for him, and as she does, she thinks that she doesn't know if the protagonist is the same Ku she met as a child, and admits that their situations could easily be just a coincidence. However, when she arrives at the room to confront him, she can't help but feel her heart ache. That's why today she wants to make everything clear, and she shows him the Kururu figurine. Once again in the past, we see that little Seika was very excited to see the figurine, so much so that her eyes sparkled and she couldn't stop praising Ku for the great job he did with Kururu. While she was having fun, Ko simply smiled, happy to have done a good job for her. Moreover, he didn't just look at the anime and manga for references, but also to understand the reason behind Seika's deep love for the character. That's how he discovered that Kururu was a heroine who never gave up, just like Seika did with her illness. And at that moment, Seika felt very happy because he had understood her. Even so, she felt quite sorry about her situation, which made her wish she could be as strong as Kururu. As if that weren't enough, she thought that if she were strong, then her mother wouldn't have any reason to cry, which brought her to tears herself, but she tried hard not to let Ku notice, who simply remained silent. It was at that moment that he took the opportunity to look at Seika's name, to which she introduced herself, explaining what it meant and asking him to call her Sei, something that felt a bit strange to Ku. The protagonist, in an attempt to cheer her up, told her that his father always said that people grow stronger as they suffer and fight. That's why, now that she was fighting even more than God himself, it surely meant that she was already someone strong. That's why he promised her that if she managed to overcome her illness, then it would be obvious that she was as strong as Kururu. Back in the present, we learned that after that encounter with Ku, she was transferred to another hospital and never saw him again. But even now, she remembers the words he dedicated to her back then. Meanwhile, she shows the figure to the protagonist, who is shocked upon seeing it and then claims that he made it, leaving Sika just as surprised, as she was finally able to reunite with her old childhood friend.